Hi, we are now looking at rural settlement issues. Wherever there's a settlement, there are going to be issues. So we are looking specifically at the rural settlement issues. So here I've got a road and I've asked what is this called. So we're moving from this area that we can see over here where it's sort of not very built up towards what's going on over there, and there's a big town in front of us. So this is called urban rural migration. That's what we're looking at here. And it says, refer to the above cartoon and list all the pull factors that attract people to the cities and the push factors that force people to move away from the rural areas. So what we've got to remember, what we're looking at here, there's pull factors, and that is something that's pulling me to go somewhere else. A push factor is something that's pushing me away. I don't want to stay here because of what's going on. And we can see they've written some words here. Here's the word drought. So drought means my farm is going to fail. I can't produce the crops I want. They've said poor harvests. Again, the drought could lead to poor harvests. There might be diseases, pests, that sort of thing, which could result in poor harvest. And if I'm relying on that, on money, so that I can survive and my crop fails, I'm going to start feeling I need to move away. Something else they've got here is poor housing. Well, if I don't have money because my crops are failing, I can't see to my accommodation, to good housing. Might be a reason why I leave. Another word here, remote. Remote is being on your own, being away, and you might want to have communication with people. And then we believe, and people believe, that in the city all their problems are going to be solved. There's going to be money, there's going to be jobs, there's going to be schools, it's going to be modern, there's going to be lots of food, we're going to be healthy and wealthy, and there's going to be houses, and it's all going to be great. And those are the factors that are pushing us and pulling us all the time, causing us to want to move. So if we look here, we have rural urban migration, which is, and here's just a definition of it, people move from the rural areas in search of better opportunities in the cities. That is what's happening. And as these people move, it leads to what we call rural depopulation. So rural depopulation is a decrease in the number of people living in the rural areas. This obviously has consequences, and we've got to look at what can be done about it. So I'm going to start off by looking at some consequences, and it's this whole cycle of decline. So there is decline in rural employment. And so what happens is there's a reduction in employment in rural towns, because if farmers are moving away, their demand for food, for schooling, for doctors, for anything like that is going to decline, and that is going to mean there is not enough jobs available. And then the solution is those people decide to move, and off they go in this whole process of rural urban migration. And you can see with the cycle, there's sort of two things that are happening. One is what has been noticed, it's often the young, active people that move, and often mainly the men, and the women are left behind to keep the little homes running. And that means your very old and very young are left in the rural areas, which means they trying to manage this whole thing, and the whole population is being reduced. That's if we go on this outside curve. If we're looking at the inside curve, what we call the age-sex structure changes. We've said the young people move. As soon as they finish school, they are moving away, leaving older people behind. We also looked over here and said often it's mainly the men that move, not the women, because traditionally the woman must stay at home and keep the home running. And so you find the young men moving, and that means the whole community is changing. Fewer babies are being born, the population is shrinking, and we get to the situation where there's less and less money being spent in this rural little village. And the less money that's being spent there, the more people don't have jobs, they don't have money, and more people are going to move away. And so this whole cycle just goes on and on and on until these settlements become little settlements that are no longer functioning properly. There's maybe very few people living there, they're very poor, their houses all tumble down, they don't have jobs, there's very little services available, schooling, all that sort of thing is a problem. And that is what is happening in that sort of region. And so we need to look and say, what can be done to promote and make rural areas more attractive so that people stop moving from the rural areas to the urban areas, and in fact even try and get people to move from the urban areas to the rural areas. And so I've just put a few things here that we could look at. So one of the things here is upgrade and make holiday destinations. Now, Clarence is a very good example of a little city that was becoming a little town actually becoming very rundown, and someone got the idea to start getting people to visit, and it actually ended up being a place where a lot of artists ended up going to live there, and it's become a place that people often go to for weekends. And you can't just decide to pitch up in Clarence on Friday and assume there'll be accommodation. They've really turned that around. Another little town, another example in South Africa is Prince Albert. It is on your way to Cape Town, just off the main N1, and it's also a little town that was becoming very run down, and they've also managed to make it into a place that is where people want to go. So make it a destination, be it for a holiday or for weekend. So improve the accommodation there, get housing there, put lodges there, things like that. Over here is a little village, and this is actually Prince Albert, where they have really gone and cleaned up the place and painted it and made it some way that you want to go. They've advertised that this is a good place to come and find good accommodation and beautiful hikes and things like that. It's a process that they actually call ecotourism, where they use the tourism of the area and encourage you to come and get involved in the environment. Another suggestion is industry, just small light industry at these little towns that are becoming run down, because the minute you have industry there, it means there's employment, and the minute there's employment, more people will come there, and then other jobs develop, because you need shops, you need schools, you need a doctor, you need those things. And so if you can get an industry going there that is from the area, here I've found a picture where with obviously in an area where they grow apples, and they're putting together a bit of an industry with the apples here. And so this little block just gives you some ideas. You've got to make it that there's vacations and there's hiking and all those sort of things. Those are things that are going to cause people not to move away, but to rather stay there and develop it. Another town in South Africa that you can go and look at is Darling, down in the Western Cape. They've also done a similar sort of thing and changed things there. And obviously all this whole thing has led to the fact that land reform is happening, and there's three different types of land reform that has happened in South Africa since 1995. And one of them is called land tenure. And basically what this is, and I've got the definition there, and I've got this man, he's lifting up this piece of land. He's not taking it away, he's just lifting it up with the little man and his little thing that's plowing on that land. And what's happened there is, with land tenure, the farmer takes his huge big commercial land, and he says to his laborers, this piece of my bit of land is yours to farm. So they'll mostly still carry on farming whatever's being farmed on the big farm, but that is theirs. So land tenure basically says it secures the right of people living on the land. They don't own it. It's owned by someone else, but they live there because they work on the farm. And this piece of land sort of becomes theirs. They still don't own it, but what they do on it becomes theirs. So if they're farming on it. I've been to a farm where that exactly is happening in near Hermanus, where they were farming with berries, and a piece of the land is given to the laborers, and whatever they farm there is theirs to use, to eat, to sell. And so in that way, that land becomes theirs, and they're working it for themselves. It gives them a sense of pride in this whole product, and it is one of the reforms that has happened. Then we get to land restitution and land redistribution. So what I'm showing here, a little cartoon with someone grabbing the land and pulling it up like that, that is not land restitution. It is also not land redistribution. That is what's called land grab. Now, it's something none of us want happening. It's about going and literally just taking over land that's not yours, and it then generally goes into disrepair and it's not successful for anyone. So what is much better is the land restitution and land redistribution, and it's important you know what those two terms mean. So land restitution is about returning land to the rightful original owners. And so if you have proof that this land belonged to someone in your family years ago, some ancestors, you've got proof of it, and you want that land back, there's a whole process you can go through, and it has been done by lots of people in South Africa. They go and able to prove that this land was mine, it belonged to my family, and therefore I should have it back, and that land is then returned to the original owners, with compensation to the people who are now living on the land. Sometimes with the land restitution is people didn't want the land, they were happy to be paid out for the land. But it's you proving that land belonged to you, and then you can get it back or get compensation for it. Land redistribution is when the government buys land or takes land it owns and gives that land to previously disadvantaged people. And a lot of it has been farmland and that, so that they can then do their own farming and make their own money in that way. And so that is the important difference. Restitution is you get the land back that belonged to your family. Redistribution, you've been given land by the government that they owned or that they have now bought. And so then, of course, we also get some social justice and rural problems, and this is what we're looking at here. Obviously, we know the depopulation. We've spoken about that. Then that's the depopulation of rural areas. We looked at that in a bit of more detail. But social injustice, that is things like access to decent health care, access to water and electricity and education and housing. And unfortunately, what happens in these rural areas, often those people do not have access to those things. And then and so these are the problems that we're dealing with and issues that have to be addressed and looked at. Then the lack of capital and investments, and obviously a lot of these people living in these rural areas are not wealthy and they can't develop themselves and improve themselves, and then there needs to be some investment happening, and it's important for companies and municipalities and governments to get involved with that sort of thing. Limited infrastructure is just referring to our roads, our water services, our hospitals and all that. That is very limited in rural areas because there's not a huge demand, because there's less people staying there. Unemployment, we saw that when we looked at the whole cycle of rural decay, it leads to a lot of unemployment. And then uneven rural population distribution. So in a rural area, not everyone lives close. It's all spread out, but some areas have more than others. And the areas that have more, obviously, have more issues because there's more people demanding these things. Lack of services, again, that comes back to the fact that there isn't a doctor available for everyone. There is not a clinic there. There is not a school there. There's maybe only a primary school or a very basic school. Land reform is a problem, and those have to be dealt with. You and I can't deal with the land reform. The government has to step in and deal with that. Obviously, soil erosion and overgrazing means crops fail. Droughts and floods means crops fail. All lead to things like poverty and malnutrition. And then a big important one is the lack of arable land. Now, a lot of South Africa does not have arable land. In fact, the western half of our country is very dry, and we do not have that much arable land. And so what is arable has to be farmed quite intensely. Right, so go back, listen to anything, read anything, look at them, know those definitions. Thank you.